There are times in life when love feels like something that simply happens by chance. We like to think attraction is nothing more than chemistry, timing, or coincidence, that people enter our lives randomly through ordinary situations as if everything is decided by pure accident. But the more deeply you observe human emotion and the patterns of connection, the clearer it becomes that some relationships carry a strange psychological depth. They don't feel random, they feel like they were always meant to happen. And when someone begins to choose you in a way that goes beyond logic, it is often because something within them recognized something within you long before their conscious mind could explain it. This is the question that quietly lives inside many people. Why you? Out of countless lives, why does one person become emotionally attached to your presence, your energy, your way of being? Why do they keep returning to thoughts of you even when they try to detach? Why does your absence echo louder inside them than the presence of others? The answer goes far deeper than surface-level attraction or modern explanations of romance. Human beings are constantly, and mostly unconsciously, searching for a sense of inner wholeness. Carl Jung explored this idea in depth, explaining that the human psyche contains hidden layers we do not fully understand, parts of ourselves we suppress, deny, or never integrate. Because of this, we often feel drawn to people who carry psychological qualities that feel familiar yet incomplete within us. Not because they are perfect, but because they awaken something dormant inside the soul. This is why certain individuals enter our lives and immediately disturb our emotional balance. They don't simply impress us, they activate something. They stir emotions we thought were controlled. They unlock feelings we believed were buried. Their presence forces an inner reaction that cannot be ignored. This person did not come into your life because you were just available or convenient. Something deeper was happening beneath awareness. Your existence challenged them in ways they did not expect. Your energy touched places in them that had been hidden for a long time. Old emotional wounds, unspoken fears, and suppressed vulnerability began to surface in your presence. Around you, they could no longer fully maintain emotional distance or pretend to be unaffected. That is what makes this kind of connection different from ordinary attraction. Many people can create interest, but very few can trigger inner transformation. Without realizing it, you became a mirror for them. And psychologically, a mirror is powerful because it reflects not only who a person believes they are, but also who they could become. In that reflection, they saw parts of themselves they had ignored for years. Your kindness may have exposed their emotional isolation. Your strength may have revealed their internal uncertainty. Your honesty may have disrupted the masks they carefully maintained in other parts of life. This is one of the key reasons they cannot simply forget you. People may move on from temporary excitement, but they do not easily move on from emotional awakening. Deep down, they sense that what they experienced with you was not feeding ego or surface desire. It was touching something more meaningful. It was confronting something within their own soul. And the soul, unlike the ego, does not forget transformation easily. Even when it is painful, it remembers what caused it to grow. What makes this even more profound is that you may not even fully realize the effect you had on them. Often, the individuals who carry the strongest psychological presence are not aware of their own impact. They are not performing or trying to influence anyone. They simply exist in their truth. They carry their experiences quietly. They remain kind despite disappointment. They continue to love even after being hurt. And in a world filled with masks, strategy, and emotional defense, that kind of authenticity becomes deeply magnetic. They did not see perfection in you. They saw something far rarer, truth. And truth has a way of lingering in the mind long after the moment has passed. In symbolic language, some traditions refer to higher awareness as moments where life attempts to guide us toward emotional evolution. Yet people often resist this process because real intimacy is confronting. To be emotionally seen by another person is to lose control of the image we carefully construct of ourselves. The ego begins to loosen its grip. Defenses start to weaken. The identity we rely on starts to feel unstable. And that is exactly what this connection triggered within them. You disrupted the internal story they had built about who they were. Perhaps they once believed they did not need emotional closeness. Perhaps they thought vulnerability was a weakness. Perhaps they convinced themselves that distance was safety. But your presence created a contradiction they could not ignore. One part of them wanted to retreat from the intensity. Another part wanted to surrender to it completely. This is why their behavior may have seemed inconsistent or confusing. Human beings often step back from the very experiences they secretly desire most, because deep connection awakens both longing and fear at the same time. Yet emotional truth has a way of persisting beyond resistance. Even when they tried to suppress what they felt, something inside them continued to return to you. A memory, a feeling, a moment, a presence that could not be logically erased. Because once something reaches the deeper layers of the unconscious mind, logic is no longer enough to undo it. And this is what becomes important to understand. Being chosen on a deeper level has very little to do with appearance, status, or perfection. It is about resonance. Some people meet your surface, while others meet your inner world. And when someone meets your inner world, they are never the same afterward. This person is now approaching a moment of inner honesty, where they can no longer fully deny what was awakened inside them. What they are moving toward is not just an admission of feeling, but an admission of impact. The recognition that meeting you changed something within their emotional direction. And perhaps the deepest tragedy in human experience is not rejection itself, but the fear of acknowledging a connection that awakened the soul. Because in the end, the people who alter your life are rarely the ones you predicted. They are the ones who quietly force you to confront who you truly are. Most people believe that when love shows up, it is instantly accepted and embraced, but psychologically, the reality is often the opposite. The deeper the emotion runs, the stronger the instinct becomes to resist it. This happens because real emotional connection does not just touch feelings. It disrupts the ego. It interrupts control. It challenges the carefully built identity a person relies on to function in the world. And this is exactly what happened here. What this person felt for you became too significant to ignore, yet too overwhelming to face directly. So like many people when confronted with something emotionally intense, they tried to step away from it. Not because the connection was meaningless, but because it was meaningful in a way that demanded change. And change is what the ego resists most. Carl Jung described the psyche as a space where conscious desire and unconscious fear constantly interact. When someone encounters a bond that has the potential to transform them, the unconscious mind often reacts first with defense. Suddenly, there is inner conflict. One part wants closeness, the other part wants safety. One part moves toward you, while the other pulls away. And what you see on the outside is only the surface of that internal struggle. If their behavior felt confusing, inconsistent, or emotionally distant at times, it is because you were not only dealing with a person, you were witnessing a psychological conflict unfolding inside them. Their silence was not emptiness. Their distance was not indifference. In many cases, it was overload. There are people who can handle attraction, attention, even desire, but vulnerability is something entirely different. It is not about impressing someone, performing for them, or maintaining control. It is about being seen without protection, and that is where fear begins. Because somewhere within this connection, they started to realize something uncomfortable. You could see beyond the version of themselves they present to the world. You could sense what they usually hide. The loneliness behind confidence, the sadness behind humor, the exhaustion behind strength. And that kind of perception can feel both intimate and frightening at the same time. Human beings spend years building psychological defenses, emotional distance, over-independence, achievement, humor, control, distraction, anything that prevents exposure. These structures are not random, they are survival mechanisms. But then a rare connection appears, and those defenses stop working the way they used to. You became that disruption, even without intention. You awakened emotions they had kept buried beneath years of emotional protection. Old memories resurfaced. Unresolved wounds reappeared. Questions they had avoided for a long time began to rise again in your presence. Around you, They could no longer remain emotionally asleep in the same way. So, they resisted. Not because they wanted to lose you, but because transformation always begins with discomfort. What most people misunderstand about emotional or even spiritual awakening is that it rarely begins peacefully. The beginning is often chaotic. It destabilizes identity. It brings suppressed emotions to the surface. It forces a person to confront what they have avoided for years. Confusion usually comes before clarity. This explains the withdrawal, the sudden distance after closeness, the inability to communicate something that clearly existed beneath the surface. It was not a lack of feeling. It was an inability to hold the intensity of what they were feeling while still trying to maintain control. But the unconscious mind does not stay silent. It speaks in patterns. This is why thoughts of you kept returning at unexpected moments. Why your presence appeared in quiet hours. Why certain songs, places, or random experiences suddenly carried your memory. Why dreams became more emotionally charged or vivid. The psyche always tries to complete what has not been emotionally resolved. What is suppressed consciously does not disappear, it returns in indirect ways. In symbolic language, this is where awareness begins to break through denial, not as something dramatic or supernatural, but as subtle moments of recognition that interrupt avoidance. Life begins to reflect the emotional truth back to the person through repetition, memory, and inattention. And over time, suppression becomes harder to maintain, because there comes a point where avoiding love becomes more painful than feeling it. That is the stage this connection is moving toward. This person is beginning to understand that distance did not remove what they feel. Silence did not erase attachment. Avoidance did not create freedom. If anything, it intensified awareness. It made the emotional truth harder to escape. Because real emotional bonds do not dissolve through suppression, they deepen beneath it. The ego values control, pride, and certainty. But the deeper self, the part of us that Jung would associate with the unconscious and individuation, values meaning. And once a connection is experienced as meaningful, it stops behaving like something temporary. That is why they are reaching a breaking point internally. The effort of hiding what they feel is becoming heavier than the fear of admitting it. For a long time, they may have believed the feelings would fade on their own. But instead, the connection continued to evolve internally, quietly, steadily, and in a way that felt almost unavoidable. And this is what people often fail to understand about love. The emotions we resist most strongly are usually the ones that reveal the most about who we are. Because in the end, the heart does not negotiate with control. It keeps speaking until it is finally acknowledged. And what makes this situation even more emotionally significant is that what drew them to you was never something surface level. Not convenience, not loneliness, not passing attraction. It was something deeper, something that does not reduce easily into explanation. And when that truth is finally confronted, it does not just change how they see you, it changes how they see themselves. They encountered your soul at a time when their own spirit felt drained and emotionally exhausted. And whether you are aware of it or not, your presence became a form of inner refuge for them. Carl Jung understood something essential about human psychology that many overlook. We are not only drawn to beauty, attraction, or pleasure. At a deeper unconscious level, we are drawn towards psychological balance. We are constantly searching for people who reconnect us with parts of ourselves we have lost, forgotten, or buried. Sometimes a single person enters our life and quietly reminds us how to feel again after years of emotional numbness. That is what seems to have happened here. Before meeting you, this person may have learned how to survive emotionally, but not how to truly live. They may have mastered appearing strong, independent, and unaffected, even convincing themselves that they no longer needed deep emotional connection. But survival and wholeness are not the same thing. Then you appeared. And something about your presence disturbed the emotional isolation they had carefully built around themselves. Not because you forced change, but because your authenticity made pretending impossible. Psychologically, authenticity is rare. Most people adjust themselves constantly to gain approval, avoid rejection, or maintain control. They perform different versions of themselves depending on the situation. But occasionally, someone carries something different, something that cannot be manufactured. A quiet, emotional honesty, a depth that comes from experience rather than performance, a presence shaped by pain that has softened them instead of hardening them. And that is what they recognized in you. They saw how you continued to give despite disappointment, how you remained kind after betrayal, how you carried invisible wounds without turning them into bitterness or cruelty. And this affected them more deeply than words ever could. Because unconsciously, human beings trust emotional truth more than perfection. Perfect people feel distant, but emotionally real people feel human. And emotionally real people create connection at a level that cannot be easily forgotten. Your experience, your resilience, your ability to remain open despite what you have endured. This communicated something their inner world needed to witness. It showed them that pain does not have to destroy softness, that suffering does not have to erase love, that emotional wounds do not have to turn into emotional coldness. And something inside them responded to that. For the first time in a long time, they may have felt emotionally safe in someone's presence. And emotional safety is one of the rarest experiences in modern relationships. People often speak about attraction, chemistry, and desire. But very few understand what it means to feel seen without performance. Around you, they did not feel forced to maintain a role. They did not feel pressured to impress or protect an image. Something in your presence allowed their defenses to loosen, even if they did not fully understand why. Psychologically, this creates a powerful attachment. Because every human being carries hidden layers, insecurities, fears, shame, emotional memories they rarely expose. Most relationships remain on the surface because both people protect themselves with masks. But with you, something in that structure began to break down. The mask started slipping. And while that may have frightened them at first, it also began to heal something inside them. This is why what they are moving toward now carries so much emotional weight. What they are preparing to acknowledge is not just attraction, it is emotional significance. It is the realization that your presence became intertwined with their inner world in a way they can no longer ignore. And admitting that is not simple for someone who has spent years believing they only need themselves, because your presence disrupted that belief. Without even trying, you became part of their emotional recovery. Your words may have brought them comfort during moments of internal struggle you never saw. Your energy may have given them stability during periods of inner chaos, and even your absence taught them something they could not ignore, how deeply they valued you. And strangely, that realization often becomes clearest in separation. When distance appears, the unconscious mind begins revealing what the ego tries to suppress. Emotional clarity increases. Feelings that were previously denied begin rising to the surface. The person starts noticing how different life feels without that connection. Conversations feel emptier. Distractions lose meaning. Even achievements can feel strangely hollow, because once the psyche recognizes genuine emotional resonance, substitutes stop working. And that is where they are now. Not in confusion, but in recognition. They are beginning to understand that what they feel did not disappear with distance. It did not weaken with silence. It actually became more noticeable in its absence. And that realization is difficult to avoid, because real emotional bonds do not dissolve when ignored. They deepen beneath awareness. The ego values control, independence, and certainty. But the deeper self, what Jung might describe as the unconscious seeking integration, values meaning. And once something is experienced as meaningful, it cannot be reduced to something temporary anymore. That is why this internal pressure is building. The effort of holding back is becoming heavier than the fear of expressing what is true. For a long time, they may have believed these feelings would fade on their own. But instead, the connection continued evolving quietly within them, steady, persistent, unresolved. And this is one of the most important truths about love that people often fail to understand. What we resist most strongly is often what reveals the deepest truth about us, because the heart does not stay silent indefinitely. It keeps returning to what matters until it is finally acknowledged. And what makes this even more significant is that what drew them to you was never superficial, not convenience, not loneliness, not passing curiosity. It was something deeper, something that reaches beyond explanation. And when that truth finally surfaces fully, it does not just change how they see you, it changes how they understand themselves. Because at the core of it, they did not simply encounter you as a person, they encountered something that awakened them. Something in them that had been quiet for a long time starts to move again. Not loudly at first, but in subtle ways they cannot easily explain. Thoughts begin to return that they thought they had outgrown. Emotions they believed were already resolved start to reappear in moments of silence. Even memories that once felt distant begin to feel close again, as if they were never fully gone. And this is where the real shift happens. Not in the external story, not in what was said or done, but in the internal recognition that something meaningful was felt more deeply than expected. That realization can be uncomfortable because it does not fit neatly into their usual way of understanding relationships. It cannot be reduced to logic alone, and it cannot be dismissed without effort. So instead, it lingers. They may try to define it in simple terms. They may call it attraction, timing, coincidence, or even imagination. But none of those explanations fully settle the feeling, because what they experienced was not just about you fitting into a role in their life. It was about you reflecting something back to them that they had not fully acknowledged within themselves. And when someone is faced with that kind of internal reflection, they are also faced with choice. To remain the same, or to question what they thought they already understood about their emotional world. That is never a comfortable position to be in. It requires honesty they may not be fully ready for yet. So they move between awareness and avoidance, between clarity and confusion, between remembering and trying to forget. Not because what they felt was not real, but because accepting it fully would require them to see parts of themselves they have not completely integrated. And still, even with distance, even with silence, something remains. Not always as longing, not always as action, but as awareness. A quiet recognition that something in their experience was different. Something left an imprint that does not fade as quickly as they expected it to. Because certain connections do not only exist in moments, they continue to exist in understanding. And once that understanding has been touched, even briefly, it does not disappear completely. It becomes part of how they interpret themselves moving forward, even if they never say it out loud.